Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of My Dog Will Eat My Face. The title of this episode is Never Let the Future Disturb You. Now, I can't take credit for that title, and you'll soon find out why as this podcast continues. I'm not nearly that clever. But the purpose of this podcast really is I want to talk about the crisis that I often have in my head. Or I guess I should say the crises I have within my head. And the ones others have inside their head. I bring this up now because several people I know, a lot of friends of mine, have suffered from this impacting me directly. Now, I've already disclosed in previous episodes I live a very isolated life, so to speak, as I decay in this illness. A lot of people don't want to deal with it. They don't want to approach it. But beyond that, I've had friends develop these internal crises, these things that exist only inside their head, to be perfectly blunt. And these crises have actually not only impacted them in their lives, but it's impacting me directly. It's cost me visits from friends and even relationships. So that's going to be really the discussion for today. But before I get into such a serious topic, I wanted to share a quick update with my listeners about the events that are going on within hospice for me. That is, I wanted to share just a quick update as to what the experience is like. And I know this is going to sound completely crazy. I know I've mentioned in previous podcasts that my nurse, a Kazakhstani, right off the boat kind of Kazakhstani, she's got the heavy accent and everything. She's a petite blonde girl. She's very pretty. And I swear to God, she has been, at least as best as I can tell, completely flirtatious with me for months now. She often says things like, "Oh, you're so handsome." And one day she showed up really early and I didn't have any time to take a shower and get ready for the day. So she said on that day, "Oh, you're even more handsome when you first get up in the morning." She's also said to me, "How do you think you got your job? Just because you're just so adorable?" So she frequently calls me adorable, or more adorable, or handsome. And it's usually surrounded with these cute little schoolgirl giggles. So I am under the impression that my nurse is flirting heavily with me. Now, I could be wrong. I've talked to girls about this, and they said it sounds more like what they would do to the geek in school to make him feel better and to basically get him to do their homework for them. So it could be as simple as that. Maybe she's just trying to make me feel better because I'm dying. Maybe she does want me to do her homework. I don't know. But me being rather naive, I swear to goodness, it sounds like she's totally flirting with me. It's just incessant. Just handsome, adorable, pretty. All these wonderful terms get dropped. day after day. And as I said, they're surrounded by these little schoolgirl giggles. So what I'm going to do for this episode, for a little fun, is I'm going to try to create a poll for my listeners. Number one, is she flirting? Or number two, does she just want me to do her homework? And I'll let my listeners decide for me. Now, the poll will only be available to Spotify users, is my understanding, if I get this to work correctly. So if you're on Apple or another platform, well, I guess, bummer for you, you can't participate in the poll. But if you're on Spotify, or if you just run over and sign up for Spotify and listen, at that point you can participate in the poll. So I'll try to do that for this episode so my listeners can tell me point blank, is she being a flirt, or does she just pity me or want me to do her homework? All right. So that fun little note being said, I'll continue with the rest of the episode here going forward. Now, I can't get into these events directly since, to be honest, I bet some of the people that have affected me are actual listeners to my podcast. And I really do wish to protect them and their personal issues. I don't want to call anyone out for an internal issue that, frankly, I myself suffer from. So who am I to throw stones in this glass house? But the bottom consequence has been that they've been unable, or I should say, thought they were unable to see me when I'm just a mere about 15 to 20 minutes away. I say this not to say, oh, woe is me, but rather to say these internal crises that we have, that I know I have, clearly do not end with us. That is, it doesn't end within our own lives, in our own head. Others have hurt me and, frankly, have tormented me. My own internal crises have left me worrying about the most unlikely events. Events I'm told won't happen, yet I still worry. An example might be, I've recently had some financial issues, to be blunt, wherein I had to engage an attorney to get some assistance to resolve some of these financial issues. And he told me point blank, it's impossible for this to backfire, it's impossible for these worries of yours to happen. And yet, as time progressed, I was having my own internal crisis. I was imagining that these things were going to happen regardless of what my attorney said. And it's pretty pathetic, to be honest. And in essence, I really sounded a lot like this.
I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here.
So, that being said, whenever I've confronted these and others, it's sadly destructive too. We seem all ill-tempered here. Man, you cray-cray about whatever thing they're cray-cray about. And I don't like to hear it. Nobody likes to hear it. Nobody got time for that. And especially in my case, where I'm facing a real crisis. I don't have time for these imaginary crises. So, I wish to endeavor how to get out of these crises myself and how to overcome my own angst, I should say, when I encounter this common issue. And my fellow man and my friends and my family, whomever it might be. And so I've got to really learn how to both overcome this within myself, for it does not just hurt me, it hurts others. In that little example I shared, it hurts others on the plane. And I've got to find a way to overcome it. And with this podcast, I just wish to share that goal and kind of tell you how I've started to walk that path to try to overcome this. So, I know I have my own crises too, and I know that I'm often misinterpreting other people's crises as malicious. And that's when I have to remember the old proverb, don't assume maliciousness when something can easily be described as stupidity. And I try to remember that as often as I can, and that in itself does hurt somewhat. But even though I say that to myself, I know I still get hurt by these other crises and others. So in order to try to find a way around these negative emotions in my last days, because again, I don't want to waste my time on things that aren't there. I mean, that sounds like the dumbest thing in the world to do. So, believe it or not, I've been reading some of Marcus Aurelius. Duh on that. I am a big avid Roman history buff. So, of course, I'm reading Marcus Aurelius for solutions. Before I actually go on, speaking of being a Roman history nut, there was a time when I was actually in Tivoli, Italy, where my favorite Roman emperor, the Emperor Hadrian, built his villa. And I was so lucky to get there and go on the typical tourist tour of the villa, which is really a huge palatial just palace built into the hills there in Tivoli, which is just outside of Rome. It's like 30 minutes outside of Rome, I would say, if that. So I was there several years back, and being the Roman Empire buff that I am, I was just a kid in a candy store. So at one point on this tour of the villa, I actually broke away from the group and did my own exploration. And I started to walk around, and I found a little broken wall in the side of a large complex that I could see on the other end. There was a large opening. So I actually got on my belly and crawled through it by myself. And it was so cool. I felt like an archaeologist discovering ruins for the first time. And so I got through this hole, and I ended up on the other side, and it was this huge vaulted hallway, still completely there. Still standing with, golly, probably 40, 50-foot vaulted ceilings. A barrel vault for anyone who is an architectural person. And it was just surreal to walk in there. It was just amazing. And, man, that was so cool. And the reason why Hadrian is my favorite Roman emperor is he came after Trajan, where the empire reached its greatest extent, including Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq. Hadrian got the heck out of Iraq right away. So he was the first leader to say, we have no business in Iraq, let's get out of there. So I give him some credit for that. He had a good exit strategy. There's nothing here but crap, let's get out of here. So Hadrian gets points for that. It seems like our modern leaders took a long time to learn that lesson, wherein he did it basically 8 o'clock day one. He got the heck out of Mesopotamia, or modern day Iraq. He also fortified the border in England, or I shouldn't say England actually, in Scotland, and that really helped the economy grow in Britannia and Gaul, other provinces. And he stopped the expansion and focused on basically allowing the empire to flourish. He was a big fan of visiting the provinces. So he was one of the first emperors to make an attempt to go on a tour of all the provinces. Maybe not all, but a lot of the provinces. And sad story is his boyfriend, because he was gay as well. His boyfriend, Antinous, who was a young Bithynian boy who he met on his tour, actually killed himself in Egypt. They were on a boat tour on the Nile, and Antinous, who was about at this point 19, I think, was terrified of growing old and ugly. He didn't want to grow old. So what he did on this boat is he threw himself into the croc-infested, hippo-infested Nile River and killed himself. And Hadrian was so grief-stricken, he returned to his villa in Tivoli, never, ever to exit for the rest of his reign, and just lived despondently in this villa, the same villa I visited and explored. And it's such a sad story of a man with a broken heart, a man ruling the known world with a broken heart from losing his boyfriend, who was so vain, who murdered himself, when indeed Hadrian just truly loved him for who he was, and lost someone who was so dear to him he could never recover. Anyway, it was that same villa that I was exploring. That's the only reason why I share that story. And I share that story because, yes, I'm a Roman history buff, and that's why, of course, I'm reading Marcus Aurelius to get some hope with respect to this topic. So there's a long explanation as to why I've turned to Aurelius, and just a brief explanation of my Roman obsession and persuasion in life. So, as I read through Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, I've come across some really good suggestions, and suggestions that can be best reflected in a few of his words that one can extract from his meditations that I'll share right now over the podcast. One is, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Another is, confine yourself to the present. Simple, but to the fact. A third one, and final one that I'll share, is never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. And I find those quotes quite compelling with respect to my current conundrum of avoiding internal crises in myself and others that simply just do not exist. For myself, I have to repeat, never let the future disturb you. I plan to repeat this to myself when my mind runs amok with a crisis that doesn't exist at all, or even yet. It could apply to both. And I can hope that perhaps with this old wisdom, 2,000 years old, I won't need to have other people beat the hell out of me because I need to get out of here. Not like the woman in the movie Airplane. I hope I don't require that kind of treatment again in the near future. And so when I combine actually some of these things that Aurelius has reflected on, I can kind of amalgamate them into a singular phrase, which I guess would therefore make it be my own. And that would be, never let the future and outside events rule over you. Again, never let the future and outside events rule over you. I hope with that sort of repetition to myself, I can begin to minimize some of these non-existent internal crises that often overcome me or often overcome others and then hurt me because these folks are just unable to handle these fears that are completely unnecessary. Because I have no control of what they do. All I can control is my own thought. So it's surprising, looking back, that this is almost 2,000-year-old wisdom that might be very helpful for me. So I plan to continue to read Aurelius, and in fact, as soon as I end this podcast, I'm going to shop around for some more of his meditations and his treatises that are available to purchase in book format. Obviously, there are things that probably he did not write, but at least amalgamations of things he said that witnesses thought he said, and so on. But either way, I hope to kind of expand on that, seeking solace and seeking a way around these internal crises, because they absolutely do hurt me and they absolutely do hurt others. So I asked my listeners to wish me luck with that endeavor. It sounds daunting to overcome this, but perhaps with good, solid practice, it can be done. I also wish to apologize to my listeners that this week's podcast is a little short. I've unfortunately physically gotten a lot worse since the last health update, believe it or not. Since then, things dramatically worsened by several fold. The edema in my body had dramatically increased. The fluid in my feet and legs and my lungs has become severe to where I can barely put on shoes, or I can't put them on at all. It's extraordinarily painful to walk. My lungs are filled with fluid, so it is hard to breathe and thus hard to talk. And there are other symptoms that I'm not going to get terribly into, but essentially apparently my heart is dramatically weaker over the course of the last couple days. I don't know why, but it's resulting in some pretty awful physical manifestation. So, anyway, with the difficulty in breathing, with the fluid in my lungs, it is hard for me to talk and to breathe. So, with that said, I still do apologize for the shortness of this week's podcast. And hopefully I'll make it up to you in good time. But again, I just want to repeat that never let the future disturb you, and never let outside events rule over you. And with that, I want to remind listeners to subscribe and make sure you turn on notifications to not miss out on future podcasts that are hopefully longer and more in-depth than this one. And I also want to thank everyone who is listening for listening to my rants and my silly rambling and silly stories. So, thank you. I hope to hear from folks voting in that poll if I do get it to work. At least have a little fun here. And with that, I will talk to you next week.